Hi, in the last video I looked at how Joseph Sweetnam and George Silver both recommend that you shouldn't try to parry cuts with a dagger. How I looked at how Giacomo di Grazia says that you can parry cuts with a dagger but only under specific circumstances. Are there other masters who would have a dissenting opinion? One of the main ones is Marozzo, the Bolognese master. And I'm not massively familiar with Marozzo, but those who train in Marozzo say, well, absolutely you can parry cuts with the dagger. And Marozzo states, and I'm using William Wilson's translation here, if he throws the mandritto, you will parry with the right edge of your dagger, and with the parry you will hurl your right foot opposite the left side of your enemy. Then you will give him a strong punta to his flank. And you can see an example of that here. Now, firstly, I have to say that I'm not a practitioner of Marozzo, so if there was any flaws in my form, well, so be it. It's not a system that I practice. Feel free to comment on them because I find it interesting. So what is Marozzo doing with his dagger that is different, that enables him to put his dagger in the way of a really solid cut? Well, what he's doing is he's creating what's called a ground path. Now I have to acknowledge here that I didn't know the term ground path until I was introduced to it by Guy Windsor. And what a ground path is that you create a path from your weapon through your body that essentially grounds you down, and if somebody pushes against you, you feel the energy going through your body and essentially grounding out through your back heel. And I'll show you an example of a pushing exercise that we do where we create a ground path as if you've just attacked, and in that line in which you've attacked you should be almost impossible to move. And all the force is going down into my heel. And note that none of the joints are locked, and as hard as he pushes, I've got all the forces going down into my back heel. So if you create a ground path, you're able to do solid dagger parries. Now, they're still not easy, but they're certainly doable. So why didn't the English authors use a ground path and parry cuts the way Marozzo shows? Are they wrong? Did they just not know what Marozzo knew? I don't think so. I think there's a bit more going on than just Marozzo got it right and English got it wrong. I think there's another issue with parrying with the dagger that we haven't entered into yet. Now, the other thing that people commonly put in their left hands and used as a defensive tool was the buckler. Now, nobody argues that you can't parry cuts with the buckler. Silver says that the fight with sword and buckler is the same as sword and dagger, excepting that you may parry single with the buckler. That you can just put the buckler in the way of an incoming cut and parry it, as you'll see here. So regardless of whether you create a ground path or not, you have enough strength with buckler parries to resist pretty much the hardest cut. Right? There's never been an issue with cuts smashing through buckler parries. So why is it then that both George Silver and manuscript 133, two of the most prominent sword and buckler treatises, both tell you not to parry with the buckler? Manuscript 133 has one buckler parry in all of the plates, and that's on plate 21, where the opponent is trying to separate sword and buckler. They're trying to cut between sword and buckler, and you just angle your buckler slightly so that the sword deflects off the buckler. In addition, in manuscript 133, the stance is such that that a ground path is created. The body is angled forward, which unfortunately in some of my earlier work on it I didn't show particularly well. But the body is definitely angled forward, and we're definitely creating a ground path. So we've got a really solid device that can take a hit, and we're creating a ground path, and yet we're told and shown that we shouldn't parry with the buckler. What's going on here? Was the author of 133 wrong? Well, no. What's going on here is not a matter of strength, it's a matter of the ability to make a parry. Not the ability to make a parry in terms of how strong your parry is, but in terms of can you actually put your weapon in the way, or can your opponent move around your parry. You're consistently told in manuscript 133 to keep sword and buckler together. So what happens if you don't do this, if you try to do what I call the standard sort of reenactor parry, where you just stick the buckler in the way and try to make a counterattack with the sword in another line. Although this is not mentioned by manuscript 133, I've included it in my classes and in everything I've written on the subject, because I firmly believe that if you want to know why a treatise is telling you to do something, you do the opposite. You do what they're telling you not to do, and explore why it is that they would tell you not to do that. So one of the things that we've done is we've explored what happens if you separate sword and buckler. Particularly in attack it's easy, you just hit the arm as the person's come in, but in defence it's a little more subtle. In defence, if you separate sword and buckler, what you need to do is you need to keep your hands together, allow your buckler to track to the opposing sword, completely ignore their buckler. What's that doing? That's just getting in the way. You allow your buckler to take your sword to the target. If your buckler goes to their sword, your sword will go to their sword arm, as you can see here. Now, in addition to that, it's just damn hard to get something the size of a buckler in the way of every attack. Yes, you can parry some attacks. Can you parry all attacks? Well, Silver tells you no. He says that defences with small objects like daggers and bucklers can be deceived, and that people can flow around the defence. Right? Whenever you do a defence, you should do it as late as possible, giving your opponent the least amount of time to redirect their attack around your defence. But even if you're really good at doing a late defence, your opponent is still able to redirect their attacks around your defence, as you'll see in this sequence of attacks that my son's making against me. So in conclusion, what have we learnt in these two videos? In order to parry cuts with a dagger, in order for your dagger parries to be strong enough to stop committed cuts, you need to create a ground path, as Marozzo has done. Now, there are systems which don't create a ground path, and hence don't give you enough strength to parry with a dagger. Are those systems wrong? No, they're not. They're not wrong because their choice not to parry with the dagger is not so much about the strength. I'm sure that Silver and Sweetnam were aware that if you changed your stance and created a ground path, you would be able to generate enough strength to put your dagger in the way of even a solid sword cut. What their objection to is that a dagger, or indeed a buckler, is a small enough object that it's easy to get around, right? That an attack, an incoming attack, can redirect around the defence and can hit you in another line. So there's actually quite a lot going on here. So I don't parry cuts with a dagger. I follow Silver or Sweetnam's advice to parry with the weapon, to trap with the dagger, and to then cut with the weapon, or thrust in for that matter. I also do this in manuscript 133. We're told to bind with the sword, trap with the buckler, and then strike with the sword. Marozzo and the Bolognese do it differently, but I personally believe that there's a weakness in their system that you can manoeuvre around the parrying dagger, even though they're using a ground path and certainly creating enough strength to do a dagger parry. Different systems have different priorities, different outcomes. I'll take the ones that don't do parries with the dagger and the buckler, and instead parry with the primary weapon. So hopefully you now understand why those systems are the way they are and why they recommend not parrying with the dagger, or indeed even with the buckler, even though it's quite doable. Thanks for watching.